Each week on Culinary Confidential, Christina Cates, a seasoned foodie who has worked at some of New York City's top restaurants, will share her passion for the culinary world. Whether you're a professional chef, a restaurant enthusiast, or a lover of good food, Christina dives into the heart of hospitality, exploring the trends, triumphs, and challenges facing the food service profession. And you won't want to miss her chats with some of the most interesting and influential industry voices. And now, please take your seat at the table as Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates starts now, exclusively on AM 970. The Answer.
Welcome to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates. This show is produced in association with my dear friend, Lucas A. Ferrara. When I first started this show back in the very early fall of 2024, I had so many seasoned friends and previous coworkers from the industry that I wanted to feature on the show that I had guests lined up for weeks ahead of time. And I was just going with the flow of it. And then over the holiday season, it hit me like a ton of bricks that I had yet to do one single show supporting the beverage community. Like, how dare I not touch on this topic yet? It's unfathomable. We talk about food on Culinary Confidential all of the time, but the beverage side is equally as important and diverse. So I said to myself, if I'm going to talk about the beverage industry, I need to go straight to the top and talk to King Cocktail himself, Mr. Dale DeGroff. He is literally a celebrity in the beverage community, and I am honored and humbled to have him on the show with me tonight. Dale will be on for the whole hour this evening, and I promise even that won't give us enough time to talk about the impression he's made in the beverage world. Dale DeGroff, also known as the King of Cocktails, or King Cocktail, is an American bartender and author. The New York Times in 2015 called Dale DeGroff one of the world's foremost cocktail experts, and wrote that his book, The Craft of the Cocktail, is considered an essential bartending reference. From 1987 to 1999, Dale rose to prominence as the original chief bartender in the Rainbow Room at Rockefeller Center in New York City, where his then unusual emphasis on classic cocktail recipes and high-quality ingredients led to substantial acclaim and emulation by many other bars in New York City and beyond, and helped influence the creation of the craft cocktail movement. What an unbelievable guest I have on the show tonight. And I have to thank my friend and repeat guest on Culinary Confidential, Bismarck Irving, for introducing me to such an accomplished individual. And, by the way, the James Beard Foundation awarded Dale DeGroff the 2009 Wine and Spirits Professional Award, and in 2015 inducted him into the Who's Who in Food and Beverage in America. He received the 2009 Lifetime Achievement Award from Nightclub and Bar Magazine, the 2008 Tales of the Cocktail Lifetime Achievement Award, and, along with his BAR partners, the 2007 Cheers Beverage Industry Innovator of the Year. He is the author of two best-selling cocktail books, The Essential Cocktail, winner of the 2009 Tales of the Cocktail Spirit Award for Best New Cocktail Bartending Book, and The Craft of the Cocktail, winner of the 2003 Julia Child Award in the First Book category. Dale is passionate about training and advocacy. He has trained countless bartenders and is a founding member of the Museum of the American Cocktail in New Orleans. Okay, welcome to the show, Mr. Dale DeGroff. Welcome to Culinary Confidential. What an absolute honor it is to have you on the show with me tonight.
Thank you, Christine. I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Dale, I just want to start from the very beginning of your career and where you kind of took inspiration from. Like, what inspired you to pursue bartending as a career?
Well, really the New York City Bar and Grill played a very large part. I was at university in 1969 and in the theater department, and we had a success at the Yale Drama Festival that was nicely reviewed by a well-known New Yorker critic. So I went back to the university, packed my bags, went to New York, never looked back, trying to be an actor, actually. But my best friend's older brother had actually hosted us on a few short trips to New York over the years. He was an advertising man. He worked at an agency which he was a partner in called Lois, Holland, and Calloway, and they had an amazing account called Restaurant Associates. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the director of new projects at Restaurant Associates, not at the time when I was there, but previous to that, when they signed on, was a guy named Joseph Baum, who ended up becoming my mentor, my boss, and the main inspiration that pushed me in the direction that I went in. Ron Holland was Ron and his partner, Jim Calloway, were big drinkers. And they also, having this account, Restaurant Associates, a plum account, I might add, they had walked away from a bigger agency called Pappard, Koenig, and Lois and brought that account with them. I'm sure much to the dismay of Julian Koenig, the big partner over there. But Ron was a famous copywriter. I got to know all about advertising because I went to work in the mailroom. While I was in the mailroom, I saw some old menus in their files from, this is 1969, 70, 71, from the days when Joe started his groundbreaking and amazing restaurants that really impacted the way people eat and drink in America in a large way. I'm sure you know the name, Joe.
Of course. And, we had Bismarck Irving on the show, who is a friend of yours. He talked about Joe Baum at the Four Seasons and at the Rainbow Room. Joe Baum is a name that's showed up on the show a couple times now because he was so influential in the industry. And would you say he's one of the biggest influences you had starting out in the industry?
Completely. Ron Holland and Ron, because he introduced me to the New York City Bar and Grill over the years. But of course, Joe was the one who I finally went to work for and met through Ron. And when you say you've heard his name, he's considered to be in the business a genius.
Yeah.
His menu consultant starting all the way back in the 50s was James Beard. Not a bad menu consultant to have.
Correct.
And the early restaurants that Joe and James put together starting in 1953, first at the Newarker Airport, the very first fine dining restaurant in an international airport, and one of the very first international airports, as a matter of fact, to tell you the truth. That was called the Newarker, and it was only closed because there were some crashes at Newark, and they shut the whole airport down for about 9 months.
Wow.
And it was awful. The Port Authority decided not to reopen it when they reopened the airport. But in that same time period, starting then right after that in New York City, in Rockefeller Center, they opened Forum of the 12 Caesars, which was a magnificent, probably the most expensive restaurant in the world at the time. And what Joe did, and he was a very creative guy. He got a call from a gallery owner of his who said that he came across 12 huge brooding portraits of the Caesars. And Joe said, "I'll take them."
Wow.
And his mind started working. He's credited by the founder of Let Us Entertain You out in Chicago with having created the whole idea of the theme restaurant. And this was the very beginning of that era, So the Forum of the 12 Caesars was the dishes that you would have had if you dined at table with the Caesars. So he wanted his captains and waiters to know that this was not Italian food. Mm-hmm. So he brought a scholar down from Columbia University to speak to them about the zeitgeist of the Roman Empire and what they were eating and what it was like, that it was there was no pasta, it was game and wild boar and all this other stuff to teach the waiters so they wouldn't consider it Italian. This is the kind of depth that Joe went to. After he opened that place, it stayed open for quite a while. There was real estate issues, and they finally closed. But in 1959-60, two really big things happened in two brand new buildings. One of them was Edgar Bronfman Sr.'s brand new Seagram's building on Park Avenue in New York, and I'm sure you probably went there because it was the home of the Four Seasons.
Yep. And do you know who I went there with?
Who?
Bismarck Irving.
Charles. Ah, nice.
Yeah.
Well, it was not going to be a restaurant. Edgar Bronfman Sr. he couldn't wait to get that Cadillac dealership open in that ground floor space. And his daughter and his daughter's husband at the time, they were later divorced, talked to Joe, talked to Edgar, and finally they brought Joe Baum in, who was working with her husband at Restaurant Associates. And Joe Baum is the one, I think, who finally pushed it over over the top and said, what you need is a world-class restaurant here. And $4.5 million later of Edgar Bronfman Sr.'s money,
Wow.
1959. That's a lot of money in 1959.
That was a lot of money in that time.
Yeah. The Four Seasons opened, and it really, in what I consider to be the era of the bland post-World War II, when we had embraced all these advances we made in mega food over the two world wars to get stuff overseas to the boys, canning, powdering, processing, all that stuff didn't go away.
Right.
The food industry embraced it. So in the 50s, the grocery store was invented, and you could walk aisle after aisle after aisle, and not until you got over in the iceberg lettuce did you see anything that looked like food. It was all cans and boxes. And so we kind of had lost our way. I mean, even women were being told to give their children canned formula, which that didn't last long, thank God, when they figured out that they were missing several really important things coming from the mother. So that era is what Joe opened these restaurants into, beginning with the Four Seasons, which the name tells the story. And I'm really talking about this, Christina, because honestly, the revolution that took place on the food side, the culinary side of our business, really set the stage and created the audience for what happened in the new millennium on the beverage side. And at the end of the old millennium, too, when we opened Rainbow, for sure. So the extraordinary service points that came out of the Four Seasons restaurant, and the extraordinary stories that came out of it. Joe tells one about meeting a elderly couple at Park Avenue entrance, which was closed later for security purposes. But they walked in, and he greeted them because he happened to be going by the door, and he said, "Oh, welcome to the Four Seasons. May I take your coats? Oh, have you seen our Picasso?" And right behind the front door was the Ballet Russe that hung there for, I don't know if it's still there in the new property, from the opening. He had purchased just for the restaurant, one of those $4.5 million expenses. And the old woman had a pince nez around her neck. She looked up at it and she said, "Oh, yes, it's a bit faded, isn't it?" And Joe was a little frustrated. There had been a lot of little picayune complaints. The ashtrays are too small for cigars. In the dining room, the tables are a little too close to the fountain. These kinds of things, and missing the forest for the trees. So when she said that, Joe said, "I'm sorry, madam. I just was giving you a little something to enjoy as you pass from the crow room to the dining room." She said, "Oh, I beg your pardon. I just meant that it's faded since we owned it."
Bismarck shared that story with me and on the show, and I thought that was so special. And clearly it made an impression because you remember it too. I mean, this guy really, Joe Baum, he really elevated the dining scene across the board and made it what it is today. And I want to talk about the Rainbow Room because he also owned the Rainbow Room, right?
He did. He owned with a partner named, a big real estate guy named Arthur Emile, and the company was called B.E. Rock. And he also had another company a couple years later called B.E. Windows, when he restored and reopened his original Windows on the World that he created back in the 70s and had been closed since the first bombing. So the Rainbow Room was not my first job with Joe. I was working at the Hotel Bel Air in Los Angeles, which was a spectacular job. I've had such luck.
Yeah, you have.
And I got a call from Ron Howard's younger brother. Said, "Call Ron." And Ron said, "Get back here because Joe needs a head bartender for this fine dining restaurant over on Madison Avenue and 49th Street. He's opening in the Bankers Trust building. This will be a good opportunity for you." And I just so happened that I was on the point of leaving the Hotel Bel Air because the piano player, Bud Herman, was an extraordinary man, had died. And the room was so different. I mean, he had been there for 20 years prior to my arrival that I didn't think I wanted to stay. And I was going to go to San Francisco and become a partner in a restaurant in Emeryville, California. And that didn't seem to be panning out. So I hopped on a plane and went back and interviewed with Joe. Joe had the most extraordinary request. He said, and by the way, he was opening this little fine dining French restaurant, but believe me, Joe was not a Francophile. He and James Beard shared a vision of a new American cuisine, and that's what they were working towards with all these restaurants. Mm-hmm. So the fact that he was opening a French restaurant had to do with his partner, Arthur, who wanted a lunch place. And they actually came at the right time to get a really good 2-star Michelin chef named Gerard Pangot. I'm sure Bismarck mentioned him.
No, he didn't. And you know what? I've had him on the show twice, and he hasn't mentioned him. He's fired from here.
He was kind of a difficult guy, Gerard.
Maybe he's blocked him out of his memory.
It could be. So anyway, Joe asked me to create a menu of drinks pre-Prohibition that hadn't been on menus for decades and decades, or just post-Prohibition. And he told me to get a book called How to Mix Drinks by a guy named Jerry Thomas, right? So and by the way, he finished the interview by saying to me, and at this point I had met Joe previously in New York. I'd gone out to L.A., by the way, still pursuing acting, but I had been working in the business in New York before I left, and I had met Joe and had been at table with Joe because of Ron Holland. He was my connection to Joe. So as I left the interview, he said, and by the way, I want you to tell the stories, because he knew that I knew Ron, and Ron was a master storyteller, and he knew that I knew some of those stories. And Joe was all about that. He was an impresario of restaurants more than an owner of restaurants. He treated it like an opera, like a theater.
Yeah, like you're on stage.
It was amazing. Totally, absolutely. And I thought that odd because it was a French place, and we were serving wines of Burgundy. We had a big copper thing with all champagne at the front of the bar. And it wasn't until Benny Goodman was at my bar that I finally went over to, this was 6 months in, I finally went over to the guy I had my first interview with, one of the, what they called cellar rats down at the original Windows of the World, worked with Kevin Zrayley. And I said, what's going on? Benny Goodman's waiting for Joe at my bar, and I've had Dale Chihuly, the artist. I've had this one, that one, all these people coming in. He said, it's the Rainbow Room thing. He said, where have you been, man? Joe's been working on it for 6 months. He's restoring that old property on top of 30 Rock. It's an extraordinary place, man. And then I realized that the drink Joe wanted to create had nothing to do with this little French restaurant. I was a lab rat for the bigger job across town over there.
Dale, stay
so
right there.
I had an idea that I wanted the gig, And I went to Joe and I said, Joe, it looks like a really interesting gig, and I've got a great idea for the Rainbow Room opening. I said, why don't we put together a menu of drinks from restaurants in the shadow of this beautiful RCA building, called GE building then, like the Store Club and the Colony and he said, I like it, make a menu, show it to me.
Perfect.
So I started working over
Dale,
a period of time.
Hold on, we have to go to commercial break. When we get back, we're going to talk about the impact you made at the Rainbow Room and in the beverage industry, because it really started there. So hold tight. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 1250 Broadway in New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970. The Answer.
Okay, we're back. If you're just tuning in, I have Mr. Dale DeGroff on the show tonight. He's the father of modern mixology. And Dale, right before we went to the break, you were just starting to tell us about, how you landed the job at the Rainbow Room, and that's really the pivotal time in your life where you elevated the beverage scene. So can you please dive right into that and tell us what you were doing at the Rainbow Room?
Sure, yeah. By the way, I you, but I couldn't get the job without going through one interview with a guy named Alan Lewis, who was in Joe's old offices downtown on 24th Street. And I went up to his office on the 5th floor, and he had his feet up on the chair and wore a cardigan sweater, elderly gentleman. Eyes closed. I thought he was asleep. Then he says, "Hey, kid, what do you need to live on?" He says to me. I've got to come up with a figure. So I do, and I'm killing myself. Oh, no, this is too low. What are you doing? And I'm on the street now, and I don't even remember what was said in this interview, and it was just too important to me. So I went to a phone booth. The kind you could walk in and shut the door. We still had him in those days.
Yeah.
And I called him back, and I said, "Could I speak to Mr. Lewis?" And he got on, and he goes, "What do you want?" I said, "Mr. Lewis, that figure, you ass. You're going to make 3 times that." 3 times that. That's clicked.
Great.
Where are those bosses today?
Oh.
I don't think they'd ever make it through the human resources.
Exactly. They'd have a lawsuit on their hands.
Really. Anyway, so I got the gig. The first mistake I made, and I made mistakes. This was not an easy gig. We had this beautiful Milton Glaser menu with 26 cocktails: the Algonquin, the Americano, the Between the Sheets, the Bronx, the Coffee Cocktail, the Rainbow's Fizz, Sazerac, Southside, 20th Century. Oh, my God. Tough stuff. Things they had never made before. The Negroni, and it was even new, a lot of them were even new to me. Of course they were. I had to research them, and we couldn't manufacture them at the clip we needed to because there was no friends and family. We opened our doors and we were 5 deep, and there were 125 seats in the lounge, and we were getting killed.
Wow.
Everybody was ordering from this menu. It was a beautiful menu. Milton Glaser graphics. Oh my God. And I'm looking at it now. I have the old one with me.
Oh, what a memory.
And well, Joe, I went to his office. I said, "Joe, we're going to have to pull the menu." And this was an expensive menu, and he was hoping to get a year out of it.
He probably wasn't happy with that.
But he was great with it, actually, because he understood. He said, "Okay, find the ones you need really to be on the menu now. We'll bring in the rest later." And these were classics now. So I downsized to 16, and we figured out a way to batch some of them. For example, the Singapore Sling had 4 spirit ingredients, and if I could put those all together in the right proportion, then at the moment of service, I only had to reach 3 things, to finish that drink. And that's the way we were able to do it at the service bar, which, served the lion's share of the drinks. I'm at the front bar. I got 16 stools, and I'm making everything a la minute. We did have a one exception. We had a, Long Island iced tea. Yeah. It was hot in that era, and mostly with Europeans. And I'd get these guys coming in, Germans, going, "We want 7 Long Island iced teas." So I just had a jug of it down there with all the spirit ingredients, and I would add the Coke and the fresh lemon juice at the moment of service, because that's the only way I could get over on a busy bar.
Right.
But everything else was a la minute. So,
now, Dale, I want to talk about the fresh lemon juice that you just mentioned, because that was one of your specialties and what you brought to the table at the Rainbow Room. And in every cocktail you've made since then, the fresh ingredient side of things, like you weren't using sour mix, you were juicing your own juices. And that's what really elevated the beverage landscape at the Rainbow Room and moving forward in the craft cocktail scene.
Yeah, pretty much everybody around the country had fallen prey to something we called sour mix.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened post-Prohibition. The first one came around in 1937. It was called 7-Eleven mix, and it ended up being, liquid, powder, bag in the box, a lot of different ways it could be conveyed, but it was awful stuff. And all the drinks that were made with it tasted the same because they would use it for their margaritas, their whiskey sours, their Tom Collinses. So what did you taste? You got the baggage from this awful stuff. Joe would not allow a soda gun in any of his bars. We had 2 big Sun-Kissed commercial juicers, one on the Rainbow Room side and one on the bar side, and they were cranking all morning long. setting us up for the day, and then we had him cranking again later in the evening if we ran out. It was an intense manufacturing process. It took a lot of thought and a lot of time to get right, but we did. And there wasn't a lot of creativity in this menu either. Joe did not want creativity. But I opened a place called Blackbird in the old Aurora property because it was a long lease. Arthur was a brilliant real estate guy and got an enormously good lease in that Bankers Trust building. And I was able to put together my own menu. I had a lot of stuff I wanted to keep on there because I thought they were wonderful, but I was able to also work with the chef and do stuff that was really cool. We were doing caipirinhas with sour cherries, caipirinhas with sweet cherries. We were doing all kinds of wonderful, creative stuff, working in tandem with the chef. It was really very cool.
A caipirinha is my favorite drink. My ultimate favorite drink.
I'm kidding.
Yeah, and they taste better in Brazil.
So when I was talking to you about Joe and his extraordinary restaurants, in 1960 he opened La Fonda del Sol in the Time Life building. Pretty ugly building as opposed to the Seegers building, which was a stunner. And I'm looking at the menu now. My son found me one and gave it to me for Christmas from 1960. Here's a couple of Joe's offerings from 1960. Mojito Criollo, Batida, Floridita, the Daiquiri Classic, Cocktail Algeria with Pisco, another Pisco drink called Algarabina, the San Martin, the Taxico Fizz with Mezcal, Sangria, Margarita, Tequila con Sangrita, unbelievable stuff in 1960. Joe had to import Pisco, cachaça, and mezcal for this menu.
Wow, what a trendsetter.
Oh my God. I mean, this is what I'm talking about. This menu was just so many years ahead of its time. And on the food side as well. I mean, when I said that Joe was looking for a new cuisine, I wasn't talking about North America. I was talking about all the Americas. When he opened this restaurant, he sent people to the Caribbean, to Mexico, to South America, to come back with dishes, with ceviches, with mixed grills, with mole sauces from Mexico City. It was an amazing place. This is the kind of guy he was. When he did something, he was a detailed person. And you know what? The great restaurateurs of our time, Danny Meyer, Joe, another one in New York City was from Balthazar and Luxembourg Grill and what's his name?
Keith McNally?
I can't remember. Keith. I worked for Keith. I opened Pravda with Keith and I opened Balthazar with Keith.
Oh, nice.
He wanted me to consult his menus because he liked what we did at the Rainbow.
Of course.
He was one of those guys. They all were detailed guys. In other words, nothing got by them.
Dale, let me ask you, how have you seen the cocktail industry evolve over the decades?
Evolve, oh my God. It's recreated. It's transformed. I mean, we've returned to our origins. We're much more culinary. As I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but I'll mention it now. We became much more culinary even while I was working. It was things were happening in this glass in terms of exotic spices and botanicals that just simply weren't there before, exotic fruits that weren't there before, unusual pairings that weren't there before. So in the new millennium, not only that, though, there was another thing that happened. The bartending world became much more community-oriented than it had ever been before. There is so much more community, and the community goes in another direction too. I don't know if you've ever heard of Speed Rack. Have you heard of Speed Rack? Two young women, Ivy Mix and Lynette Marrero, who have raised over $1 million for women with breast cancer that are in the industry. Women bartenders competing for speed and quality across the States, South America. They've done it in Europe and London.
That's incredible.
They've done it in Australia, and they raised tons of money. Tony Abuganan out he opened the Bellagio as the beverage director. He put together something called the Helen David Foundation, also raising money for industry people who never have insurance for medical stuff.
That's amazing.
This is something that. And all this crowd rise. There was a bartender at Zigzag Restaurant who needed heart surgery, one of the beloved bartenders in our industry. Within 2.5 weeks, worldwide, $250,000 was raised to give him heart surgery. I mean, it's that never exists. When I worked at the joints on the East Side as a young bartender, you had your register. The guy at the other end had his register.
Dale, hold tight. We need to go to our last commercial break. When we get back, I want to talk about your spirits line that you've launched, and I have some more industry questions for you. You're listening to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970, The Answer.
Over the last 30 years, Newman Ferrara, a New York City law firm, has evolved into a national practice focused on real estate, commercial, litigation, civil rights, class actions, and other complex litigation, representing many of the city's largest property owners, managing agents, and thousands of tenants. Newman Ferrara handles some of the nation's most significant class actions and civil rights matters. Newman Ferrara at 1250 Broadway in New York City. Go online to newmanferrara.com. That's newmanferrara.com. Listen to the firm's name partner, Lucas Ferrara, every Saturday at 10 a.m. on Dottie Herman's longest-running real estate radio program, Eye on Real Estate on AM 970. A real estate lawyer for 35 years, Lucas is a professor at New York Law School and is also a published author with books on real estate and New York's landlord-tenant law. Tune in Saturdays at 10 a.m. to hear Lucas's unique perspective and advice on Eye on Real Estate.
Welcome back to Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970, The Answer.
Okay, we're back. If you're just tuning in, I have Mr. Dale DeGroff on the show today, who is the most impressionable person in the beverage world. And he was taking us on a tour of his career from the early beginnings and how he worked at the Rainbow Room and really made that a shining star in the cocktail world. And he's back on the show. Welcome back, Dale.
Thank you, Christine. I'm delighted.
Now, I want to ask, because there are rumors floating around that you created my favorite cocktail, the Cosmopolitan. Is that true?
No. No. Toby Cicchini created it down at the place called the Odeon.
The Odeon,
big
still here
art
today.
Gallery hangout.
Yeah,
it's a wonderful, wonderful place. No, what happened? He claims, and there's no claim about it, he actually served her on many occasions, Madonna, because she hung out there. And I served Madonna not at my bar, but in the Rainbow Room at a Grammy party when Frank Sinatra, Madonna, and Bob Dylan were all at the same party and dividing up sections of the Rainbow Room for their private parties, if you will.
Wow, what went on at their private party?
Only Cosmopolitans at Madonna's party.
Wow.
So it wasn't a party, it was part of the big party, but they had their areas, that were roped off.
Yeah.
And one of the guys from AP, who are our neighbors and my regular second shift photo guys, all hung out at my bar, called me during the party and said, "Hey, we just got our guys sending over stuff to us from the party, and we're just getting to it now, and I see Madonna's drinking some pink drink." And I said, "This is what you say. Madonna enjoying a Cosmopolitan at the world-famous Rainbow Room." And that went out on the wire.
Oh, so that's where the rumor came from.
I got calls from Australia, from London. "What is this drink Madonna's drinking?" It was comical. And I sent the recipe. And not only that, I ended up working in Europe and using the Cosmopolitan as a vehicle. So I had a little more bang publicity-wise than Toby did. So I think I got accredited in the press for inventing it, as much as I tried to discourage people from saying. I said, no, it's not my original drink. Although I did some little tweaking with it. I flamed an orange peel on top and
you
had
gave it some flair.
Yeah, it had a little different spec than him, but close to his,
Now listen, you make the drink in the Nick and Nora glass, right?
Well, I have to tell you about the Nick and Nora glass. That came from the Rainbow Room. it was a glass that didn't exist, and I went to Joe and said, Joe, we really need a glass with tradition. You got dishes with tradition, we have drinks with tradition. We need a glass with tradition. This V-shaped martini didn't come until after the Second World War, and I'm making drinks from from way back when. And
Yeah.
so I went. He said, go to Minner's Designs and look at their old catalog. So I went and looked at their old catalog, and I found a glass called the Little Martini. And I took it up to the guy. I said, "This is the drink that I was looking for. It's the drink that the Thin Man, Nick and Nora Charles used in the Thin Man, the little bowl on the stem, not the V." And the guy said, "Well, it's going to cost you some money. We have to build those. We have to make those. I hope you're buying a lot of them. Those molds don't exist anymore." I said, "Make it." Well, we bought them, and we put all of our older style cocktails in that Nick and Nora glass, which I reordered regularly by calling it the Nick and Nora. Because I said to my sales guy, this is the glass, the Nick and Nora glass I was talking about the first time. And so he said, "We'll just write it on the order, and I'll know which one it is," because they called it the Little Martini.
Wow.
And actually what happened was Minner's went out of business after 100 years. Part of their catalog was picked up by Steelite, China Glass and Silver.
Mm-hmm.
They got the Little Martini, but they used the name Nick and Nora.
And now it's the Nick and Nora glass.
It's now the Nick and Nora. So I feel like this is one of my most claims to fame is that little glass called the Nick and Nora.
If there's one thing I hate more than a margarita glass, it's a martini glass. The drink always spills. So the Nick and Nora glass I find to be very elegant. You can drink it at a bar. It doesn't spill everywhere. So I'm a huge Nick and Nora glass fan.
I get it. I use them. I use several different kinds of coupes and Nick and Noras, and even V-shaped, depending on the drink.
Right. Now I have another question, because we're talking about glassware. How important is the ice profile these days? Because you have the King Cube, right? The big cube that goes in anything that's going on the rocks. You have pebble ice. I mean, some bartenders take their ice game really seriously when making cocktails.
I know they do. I have to tell you, my first meeting with Sasha Petrosky down on Eldridge Street when he was only open a little while, a friend of mine who lived across the street brought me in because he had started drinking there. And when he found out that the friend knew me, he said, "Why don't you bring Dale in?" Because he was starting out, Sasha, and had worked at a couple places, mostly as a waiter, but as a bartender. And he wasn't too long out of the service. And he started hitting me with a lot of questions. The next time I went in, I brought him some books, old books that I had duplicates of. And he asked me about ice. And I said, well, we used the famous cold draft ice machine. They go back to the early 20th century. They were the large cubes that sort of owned the bar business for many decades. And then the Japanese machines came in because they could make ice faster, but it melted quicker and it wasn't as quality as the cold draft. And so at the Rain Room, we had two big cold draft machines, and they're $8,000 a piece. And,
wow.
He's like, no, that ain't gonna happen. So I go back the next time, and he's got those freezers that you could put a body in?
Yeah.
He had one of those, and he was making his own ice, all different shapes. So that thing you're thinking of like the long cube that goes in a highball glass, the big 2x2, that was Sasha.
Wow.
He started, not only did he start that, he started an ice factory at his place in Brooklyn, where to this day, they're making and selling ice. He did the same thing out in Austin, Texas, at a place called Half Step, where they have an ice machine behind the bar. I mean, a big commercial that they can sell, for to other bartenders. So it's a great story. So I started using cold draft because of Joe. He said, get a cold draft machine. I want to see big cubes. I don't want, and that's what made cold draft machines famous. They served that, not the 2x2, but
the long one.
1 1/4 by 1 1/4 by 1 1/4 solid. That was considered because the little chips that came out of the ice, out of the Japanese machines were terrible.
Before the end of the show today, I want to make sure we talk and give, enough time to your product line that you have at DeGroff Spirits. You have 2 products that you feature. Can you tell us about them?
It was inspired by my work with Campari and by my work with Ted Bro, the absinthe maker. I make cocktail bitters with him.
Nice.
We're making a bitter aperitivo and an amaro And Campari some years ago was distributed by Sky Spirits, and they bought stock in that company until they owned it, and then they moved it to New York and called it Campari America. And they wanted to take over the cocktail hour. This was 20 years ago, with two drinks, the Negroni and the Spritz. And I'd say they succeeded. And we're in those categories. My bitter aperitivo would be the Campari in a Negroni or a Spritz, and my Amaro, well, you know what Amaro is. We have the bookends. We have a Digestivo, and we have an aperitivo. Each, bookending the meal. So the end of the meal would be the Amaro, and you can use it as young bartenders are doing in things called Black Manhattans, where it takes the place of the bitters. And I have a lot of Amaro drinks that I'm doing with our Amaro, and our Amaro is called New World Amaro because there is no Amaro in the world that uses the botanical as the base that we're using, allspice.
Wow. That's
a New World botanical. It grew in the South American jungles and in the Caribbean. It didn't grow anywhere else in the world until people started. The distillery is called Hood River Distilling. It's in Hood River in Oregon. They own a small distillery called Clear Creek, which opened way back in 1985, making fruit brandies. That's the facility that we're made in. There's a wonderful distiller, Caitlin Bartlemay, and she's using Ted, who is my distiller partner, his protocols to make these two spirits at that distillery. Ted goes out regularly. He also still goes to France, to Combier, to make his absinthe, Jade Spirits. So he's a man. When it comes to botanicals, he's just a genius.
Yeah, so, I'm sure.
This is the beginning for us. We're if these two are successful, we have other ideas. It's called DeGroff Spirits for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And people should visit DeGroffSpirits.com to check out more about your product line and the history of it.
And where they can buy it.
Yeah. Is it in any liquor stores or things like that for people to purchase? Or
can
you it
right
online?
Here in town. It's in Park Avenue Liquor in Manhattan. We are in about 9 states now where we're moving into the market, but you can buy it online. If you go to the website, you'll see a little button up the top that says, online purchases. It's a slow process developing a brand. I'm
sure. Dale, I have some other questions for you, just some fun questions to kind of end our segment together. What is the strangest cocktail request you've ever received?
Strangest cocktail request? Well, it used to be strange, but now anything goes. A sardine stuffed olive in their martini was always a goodie.
Ooh. Yikes.
Yeah. That's those white sardines that come from the.
I know people love those.
Cool.
They're good. No, they're not for me. They're not for me. What about if you could share a drink with any historical figure, like at any time? Who would it be? Well, and what would you make them?
I'd like to make a proper martini for FDR because his martinis were legendarily bad. People would actually turn down invitations to the White House because they knew how bad his martinis were.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But if I was going to make drinks for a group of famous people and they came to the Rain Room, I'd love to make drinks for this group. Groucho Marx, Mae West, Louis Armstrong, Samuel Clemens, and W.C. Fields. What a bar that would be.
Yeah. with you behind
Manhattans and martinis all the way.
That would be amazing. What are you drinking at home when you have a cocktail?
I'm in the 50-50 martini world now. The martini has evolved just as the business has.
Yeah.
And by the way, I forgot to mention things about this business. The consolidation created so many thousands and thousands of new, many of them luxury products. And our palate as bartenders is so much richer than it ever was. Do you know there were only 1,500 spirits after Prohibition, right after Prohibition? There are 7,000 gins worldwide now. Gins alone.
I didn't know
that's not even the most popular spirit.
Yeah, that's not even the most popular.
No, our spirit choices now. I in my new book, The New Craft of the Cocktail, I branded every single drink. In my first book, I didn't brand any of the drinks unless it was something I couldn't replace, like chartreuse or Cointreau.
Right.
Because we can craft drinks to specific tastes. Even in gin or tequila, I can have a style, I can have a flavor that I want in every category. Rum, it's just amazing what's out there on our palate as bartenders now.
I love it. Dale, I thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. You are celebrated for being the first to revive the great classic cocktails of the 19th century at the Rainbow Room and in the 1980s. I'm having on the show next week, and I haven't even told you this yet, Doug Frost, who I know that you know.
My partner. He's a business partner.
Oh, I didn't know he was your partner. I mean, for those listening...
Beverage Alcohol Resource was Doug and I, Steve Wilson, Andy Seymour, Paul Packalt. We did the master's classes in bar smarts all around. We've got 15,000 bartenders that we trained out there somewhere.
Wow. But Doug Frost is one of 4 people in the world that holds the Master Somm certificate and a Master Wine certification. So he's going to do our...
also the nicest, friendliest, and best sommelier, because, you know, sommeliers can be a little bit snooty.
Oh, totally. I mean, I had the loveliest conversation with him the other day. I am so excited to have him on because he's going to shed some light on the wine world where you carried the cocktail torch. So that's the show for tonight. Thank you for listening. This was Culinary Confidential with Christina Cates on AM 970 The Answer.
The preceding program is sponsored by Shake It Off Live, LLC.